Cadet Jake Thompson felt the transport shuttle shake as it docked with Kepler Station. Through the small porthole, he could see the massive structure spinning slowly in space, its metal surfaces gleaming under the light of 3 different suns. This was it, the Galactic Military Academy, where Earth was sending its first representative in over 200 years. The shuttle doors hissed open, and Jake stepped onto the polished metal floor. His standard Earth military boots made sharp clicking sounds that echoed through the enormous corridor. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he could barely make out the top, and the hallways seemed to go on forever in both directions. Alien writing covered the walls in languages he didn't recognize, though his translator implant was already working to decode the basic symbols. Other beings filled the corridor, and Jake tried not to stare. A group of tall, blue-skinned creatures with 4 arms walked past, their movements graceful and precise. Near information display, several furry beings that looked almost like oversized cats stood on their hind legs, discussing something in quick, chirping sounds. Jake had studied the files on dozens of alien species during his 6-month journey to the station, but seeing them in person was completely different. "Look at that!" came a rough voice from behind him. "Another Deathworlder." Jake turned to see a massive reptilian creature approaching. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick, scaled skin that bore dozens of old scars. Its eyes were yellow and cold, and when it spoke, Jake could see rows of sharp teeth. The name tag on its dark green uniform read Sergeant Corvain in both alien script and English. "They never last more than 3 days," Sergeant Corvain said to a shorter, insect-like being standing beside him. The second creature had multiple eyes that moved independently, each one focusing on Jake with obvious curiosity. Jake had heard about the reputation of Deathworlders before. Earth was considered one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, where everything from the weather to the wildlife tried to kill you on a daily basis. Most alien species came from what they call garden worlds, peaceful planets where the biggest threat might be a mild thunderstorm or a creature no larger than a house cat. But that reputation worked both ways. While some aliens respected humans for surviving on such a hostile world, others saw them as primitive savages who relied on violence instead of intelligence. Jake could tell from Sergeant Corvain's expression which category he fell into. The corridor was filling up with more cadets now. Jake watched them carefully, noting how they moved and interacted. Most of them were clearly from military families. Their posture was perfect, their uniforms spotless, and they carried themselves with the confidence of beings who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Several alien species were represented, but they all had one thing in common. They looked like the absolute best their worlds had to offer. The course curriculum is legendary, Jake had read in his briefing materials. 6 months of the most intense military training the galaxy had ever developed. The program was designed to take the finest warriors from dozens of different worlds and forge them into officers capable of leading mixed-species units in combat. The dropout rate was intentionally kept at 50%, not because they couldn't train more officers, but because they believed that only those who could survive this crucible were worthy of command. Most of the other cadets towered over Jake. Even the smallest among them was at least 6.5 feet tall, with obvious physical advantages like extra arms, enhanced sensors, or natural armor plating. Jake, at 5 feet 10 inches, felt distinctly average by comparison. "Welcome to hell, human," Sergeant Corvain growled, his voice carrying easily over the noise of the crowded corridor. "Try not to embarrass your species too quickly." Several nearby cadets turned to look at the exchange. Jake could feel their eyes studying him, probably wondering what made Earth think it could compete with the galactic elite. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few seemed almost amused. Jake simply nodded in response to the sergeant's comment. While the alien officer was trying to intimidate him, Jake was already doing what humans did best, adapting and analyzing. His eyes swept the facility, automatically cataloging exit routes, identifying potential choke points, and calculating the most efficient paths between different areas. Without even thinking about it, he was treating this place like any other potentially hostile environment. And on Earth, every environment was potentially hostile. The morning alarm on Kepler Station sounded like a low humming noise that seemed to vibrate through the metal walls. Jake had been awake for 20 minutes already, a habit he developed growing up on Earth where being the first one up often meant the difference between eating breakfast or going hungry. While his alien roommates were still stretching and groaning their way out of sleep, Jake was already dressed and reviewing the day's training schedule on his tablet. The tactical assessment room buzzed with nervous energy. 43 cadets sat at individual workstations, their screens displaying complex battle scenarios that would determine their placement in the program. Most of the aliens had spent weeks studying for this moment, reviewing centuries of military doctrine from their respective homeworlds. Jake looked at his screen and saw a familiar pattern. The scenario showed a contested planet with multiple enemy positions, limited resources, and civilian populations caught in the crossfire. It was the kind of problem that military academies back on Earth might spend an entire semester dissecting. Hey, they had 4 hours to complete 12 different scenarios. He finished the first scenario in 8 minutes. The problem wasn't that the tactical situation was simple. It was actually quite complex, with multiple moving parts and several possible approaches. But Jake's brain seemed to process it differently than his alien classmates. Where they saw a puzzle to be solved step by step, Jake saw patterns. The enemy positions reminded him of how pack hunters would surround prey back on Earth. The resource limitations were like rationing supplies during a harsh winter. The civilian evacuation routes looked just like the paths animals would take when fleeing a forest fire. By lunchtime, Jake had completed all 12 scenarios. Most of his classmates were still working on their third or fourth. "There must be some mistake," Sergeant Corvain muttered, staring at his tablet screen. He was standing in the observation room above the training floor, watching as Jake moved through the physical endurance course. The course was designed to test the limits of alien physiology, beings who had evolved on worlds where the greatest physical challenge might be climbing a steep hill or running from a slow-moving herbivore. The endurance trial consisted of a 2-mile run through obstacles, followed by strength tests, climbing challenges, and finally a series of reaction time exercises. The previous record holder was a cadet from Rigel Prime, whose species was known for their incredible stamina. He had completed the course in 3 hours and 14 minutes, and that record had stood for over a decade. Jake crossed the finish line in 4 to 7 minutes. He wasn't even breathing hard. "Check the timers again," Sergeant Corvain ordered his assistant. "Check them twice. This has to be some kind of equipment malfunction." But the timers were working perfectly. Jake had simply moved through the course with an efficiency that none of the instructors had ever seen before. Where other cadets struggled with the climbing sections, Jake flowed up the walls like he'd been born to it. The obstacle course that tripped up most aliens seemed to barely slow him down. He moved through it like he could see every barrier coming before he reached it. In the combat simulation room, things were getting even more interesting. The room used advanced holographic technology to create realistic battle scenarios. Cadets wore special suits that could simulate everything from weapon impacts to environmental hazards. The AI running the simulations was designed to be unpredictable, constantly adapting to each participant's tactics to keep them challenged. Jake was breaking the AI. "His pattern recognition is off the charts," reported Sergeant Vex, her compound eyes studying multiple data streams simultaneously. "Look at this. The simulation AI tries to surprise him with an ambush from the left, and is already moving to counter it before the enemy units even appear on screen." The other instructors gathered around her workstation, watching Jake's performance data scroll past in real time. His heart rate stayed remarkably stable even during high-stress scenarios. His reaction times were consistently faster than the simulation's ability to present new threats. Most remarkably, he seemed to be learning and adapting faster than the AI could compensate. "It's like he's predicting the future," whispered one of the junior instructors. "No," Sergeant Vex said slowly, her multiple eyes focusing on different aspects of the data. "He's not predicting. He's recognizing. Every scenario we throw at him, his brain is comparing it to something he's seen before. But how is that possible? He's barely 22 years old." What they didn't understand was that Jake hadn't just been alive for 22 years. He'd been surviving for 22 years. On Earth, a world where everything from the weather to the wildlife was actively trying to kill you, pattern recognition wasn't just useful, it was essential. Jake's ancestors had survived ice ages, predator attacks, natural disasters, diseases, and countless other threats by developing the ability to spot danger before it spotted them. The stress hormones that were overwhelming the alien cadet systems were having a completely different effect on Jake. Instead of clouding his judgment or making him panic, the adrenaline was sharpening his focus and speeding up his reflexes. His body was designed to function at peak performance under pressure, because on Earth, pressure was just another word for Tuesday. Meanwhile, Jake continued through his training routine, completely unaware that every instructor on the station was now monitoring his progress with a mixture of fascination and growing concern. To him, this was just another day of trying to stay alive and get better at his job. He had no idea that he was rewriting everything the galaxy thought it knew about military training. Day 4 started like any other, but Jake could sense something different in the air. The instructors were whispering more than usual, and several of them kept glancing in his direction with expressions he couldn't quite read. When he entered the advanced simulation chamber, he noticed that every instructor on the station seemed to be present, either in person or watching through the observation windows above. "Today's exercise is special," announced Sergeant Corvain, his reptilian features more serious than usual. "This scenario has been used at the Academy for over 300 years. No cadet has ever successfully completed it. The purpose is not to win, but to learn how to make the best decisions when victory is impossible." The scenario loaded around Jake in perfect holographic detail. He found himself commanding a small outpost on a contested planet. His forces were outnumbered 10-1, with limited ammunition, no reinforcements coming, and civilian population scattered throughout the combat zone. The enemy had superior technology, air support, and seemed to know his every move before he made it. Intelligence reports showed that surrender would result in the execution of all military personnel and the enslavement of the civilian population. Most cadets who faced the scenario spent hours agonizing over impossible choices, eventually choosing what they believed was the least terrible option. The exercise was designed to teach future officers that sometimes there are no good choices, and that command means accepting responsibility for unavoidable losses. Jake studied the tactical display for 3 minutes, his eyes scanning the terrain, troop positions, and resource allocations. Then he started moving his pieces. Instead of trying to hold the outpost, Jake immediately began evacuating all non-essential personnel. While the enemy focused their initial assault on what they assumed was his main defensive position, Jake was already moving his real forces to 3 different locations the enemy hadn't even considered. He used the civilian evacuation as cover, hiding military assets among the refugee convoys. "What is he doing?" muttered one instructor. "He's abandoning his primary objective." But Jake wasn't abandoning anything. He was redefining the mission parameters. Instead of seeing the outpost as something to defend, he saw it as bait. While enemy forces wasted time and ammunition, destroying an empty building, Jake's units were setting up ambush points along the evacuation routes. 20 minutes into the simulation, Jake had turned the tables completely. The enemy forces, spread thin trying to chase down what they thought were fleeing refugees, found themselves caught in a series of coordinated attacks. Jake used the planet's natural terrain, knowledge that most alien species wouldn't think to exploit since their homeworlds lack such dangerous geography, to create traps and choke points. "This is impossible," Sergeant Vex whispered, all of her eyes focused on different aspects of Jake's performance. "He's using tactics that violate everything we know about proper military procedure." Jake's approach was unlike anything in the galactic military textbooks. Where alien doctrine emphasized careful planning and rigid adherence to established procedures, Jake seemed to be making it up as he went along. He combined hit-and-run tactics with psychological warfare, using the enemy's own assumptions against them. When they expected him to retreat, he attacked. When they prepared for a frontal assault, he disappeared entirely. Most shocking of all, Jake was treating the civilian population not as a burden to be protected, but as an asset to be utilized. He organized them into intelligence networks, supply lines, and even diversionary forces. This kind of thinking was almost unimaginable to most alien species, whose military traditions kept strict separation between military and civilian roles. "He's not just winning," reported the chief tactical instructor. "He's winning decisively. Enemy casualties are at 70% in climbing, while his own losses are minimal." By the end of the simulation, Jake had not only saved the outpost, but had managed to capture most of the enemy leadership and liberate 3 additional territories. The computer running the scenario kept trying to introduce new complications, reinforcements for the enemy, natural disasters, equipment failures, but Jake adapted to each challenge faster than the AI could generate them. "How many different victory conditions did he achieve?" asked Commander Thorne, the station's highest-ranking officer. Sergeant Corvain checked his tablet, his clawed hand shaking slightly. 17 different paths to victory. Sigh. The simulation logged 17 distinct strategies that each would have resulted in mission success on their own. He was running multiple backup plans simultaneously. Word of Jake's performance spread through the station like wildfire. During the meal break, cadets from other training groups began approaching him, their attitude completely different from the skepticism he'd faced just days before. These were beings who had trained their entire lives for military excellence, and they were looking at him with something approaching awe. "How do you think so fast?" asked Cadet Xylan, a tall being with crystalline skin whose species was known for their analytical minds. "During the simulation, you were making decisions faster than our tactical computers could process the same information." Jake paused with his food halfway to his mouth. How could he explain that speed wasn't really the issue? On Earth, thinking slowly got you killed. Whether you were facing a charging predator, a sudden storm, or a collapsing building, survival meant making the right decision with incomplete information in seconds rather than minutes. "I don't really think about it," Jake said honestly. "I just look at what's happening and figure out what needs to be done next." The alien cadets exchanged glances. To them, Jake's approach seemed like magic, the ability to see solutions where none existed, to turn certain defeat into overwhelming victory. They didn't understand that from Jake's perspective, he was just doing what humans had always done, adapting, surviving, and refusing to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. Late that night, emergency meetings ran well past the station's normal quiet hours. Every instructor was present, either physically or through holographic conference links. The topic of discussion was simple but urgent. What do you do when one cadet is rewriting everything you thought you knew about military strategy? "We need to study him," some argued. "If we can understand how his mind works, we could revolutionize galactic defense." "We need to be careful," others warned. "He's operating on principles we don't understand. What if we're not seeing genius, but something more dangerous?" But in his quarters, Jake was already asleep, completely unaware of the debates raging about him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he wanted to be ready. After all, being ready was just another word for staying alive. The instructors had spent the entire night planning something that had never been attempted in the Academy's 300-year history. They were going to throw every advanced scenario at one cadet simultaneously, creating a training environment so complex and demanding that it would push the limits of what any being could handle. The goal wasn't education anymore. It was to find Jake's breaking point. "We're combining urban warfare simulation with zero-gravity combat training," explained Commander Thorne to the assembled staff. "Add in psychological warfare operations, multi-species team coordination, and real-time tactical analysis. If this doesn't overwhelm him, nothing will." The advanced training chamber was unlike anything Jake had seen before. As he entered, the room began transforming around him. The walls disappeared, replaced by a perfect holographic recreation of a war-torn city floating in space. Debris drifted past the windows of damaged buildings, and the artificial gravity fluctuated in different zones, creating pockets where up and down became meaningless. "Your mission," announced Sergeant Corvain through the intercom, "is to lead a mixed-species assault team through enemy-controlled urban terrain in variable gravity conditions. Simultaneously, you will be running psychological operations to turn enemy civilians against their own military, while coordinating with 3 separate command structures that don't share common communication protocols." Jake looked around at his assigned team. There was Cadet Torvin, an insect-like being whose species communicated through pheromones. Cadet Helix, whose crystalline body could analyze electromagnetic frequencies but struggled with rapid decision-making. And Cadet Borak, a massive furry creature whose species had never developed concept of individual initiative, always preferring group consensus. In the observation room, every instructor on the station watched through multiple camera angles. Additional screens showed biometric data from all participants, tactical analysis feeds, and communication intercepts from the simulated enemy forces. "His stress indicators are actually decreasing," reported Sergeant Vex, her multiple eyes tracking different data streams. "Everyone else is showing elevated anxiety levels, but the human seems to be getting calmer." Jake was indeed feeling more comfortable as the scenario ramped up in complexity. The multi-layered challenge reminded him of growing up on Earth, where you never faced just one threat at a time. Hurricanes came with flooding and power outages. Predator attacks happened during blizzards when visibility was low. Equipment failures occurred at the worst possible moments, usually when you were already dealing with two other emergencies. Torvin, I need you to use your chemical sensors to map enemy positions in the lower levels, Jake said, his voice steady despite floating upside down relative to his team members. Helix, you're monitoring their communications. Look for patterns in their radio chatter that might tell us about reinforcement schedules. Borak, your people are natural consensus builders, right? I want you to start psychological broadcasts to enemy civilians, but make it sound like their own leadership is suggesting evacuation. What happened next surprised everyone watching. Instead of struggling to manage multiple complex tasks, Jake seemed to be operating on several different levels simultaneously. He was personally leading the assault through the zero-gravity urban maze, ducking under floating debris and using damaged building structures for cover. At the same time, he was coordinating psychological operations by feeding Borak specific talking points based on intercepted enemy communications that Helix was decrypting in real time. "This shouldn't be possible," whispered one of the junior instructors. "Look at his brain activity scans. He's processing information in parallel streams that our computers can barely track." But Jake wasn't thinking about brain scans or parallel processing. He was just doing what felt natural, paying attention to everything at once. On Earth, survival meant being aware of the weather, the terrain, potential predators, available resources, and escape routes all at the same time. His ancestors who couldn't handle multiple threats simultaneously simply didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. Halfway through the simulation, something unexpected happened. Cadet Helix became overwhelmed by the rapid-fire decision-making requirements and froze up completely. In most training scenarios, this would have meant automatic failure for the entire team. "Helix, look at me," Jake said calmly, floating over to the crystalline being while somehow still maintaining tactical oversight of the entire operation. "You're trying to analyze every possible outcome before making any decision, right?" Helix's crystalline structure flickered, the equivalent of a nod among his species. "That's not how it works in real combat," Jake explained, still coordinating the psychological warfare broadcast with one hand while stabilizing his floating teammate with the other. "Sometimes you have to make decisions with incomplete information. Sometimes you have to accept that good enough is better than perfect." This was a completely alien concept to Helix's species, who had evolved on a stable world where careful analysis was always possible. But Jake's calm confidence was infectious. "Pick the option that keeps the most people alive right now," Jake continued. "We can adjust later if needed. In human terms, we call it acceptable losses. Sometimes you sacrifice smaller advantages to prevent larger disasters." Something clicked in Helix's mind. Instead of trying to compute every possible scenario, he started making rapid decisions based on immediate priorities. His performance improved dramatically. "His teaching," Sergeant Vex observed, recording everything. "In the middle of our most complex scenario, while performing multiple command functions, he's conducting real-time tactical instruction." By day 6, the situation had become completely unprecedented. Jake was simultaneously completing advanced exercises designed for veteran officers while explaining human military philosophy to both cadets and instructors. During break periods, he found himself surrounded by beings asking questions about Earth tactical concepts. "Why do humans accept losses that other species would consider unacceptable?" asked Cadet Torvin. "Because on Earth, the alternative to acceptable losses is usually total losses," Jake replied. "If you're not willing to sacrifice something small to save something big, you often end up losing everything." These conversations were being recorded and transmitted to military academies across the galaxy. Jake's casual explanations of human survival instincts were revolutionizing how alien species thought about command decisions, risk assessment, and crisis management. Commander Thorne sat in his office, reviewing the day's training footage for the third time. His most experienced instructors were now attending Jake's impromptu seminars, learning concepts that challenged centuries of established military doctrine. "We designed this program to teach leadership," he said to Sergeant Corvain. "But we assumed we knew what leadership looked like." Sergeant Corvain nodded slowly, his reptilian features troubled. "The human isn't just completing our curriculum, Sci. He's showing us that our curriculum was incomplete." Late that night, Jake was reviewing the day's exercises on his personal tablet, making notes about what could be improved tomorrow. He had no idea that several alien military councils were holding emergency sessions to discuss the implications of human tactical thinking, or that recruitment officers from dozens of species were already requesting permission to study Earth's military traditions. To Jake, it had just been another day of training. Tomorrow would probably bring new challenges, and he wanted to be ready for them. After all, being ready was what humans did best. The morning of Day 7 felt different from the moment Jake woke up. The usual sounds of the station seemed quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. When he arrived at the examination hall, he found it packed with observers. Not just regular instructors, but high-ranking officers he'd never seen before, their uniforms decorated with medals and insignia from dozens of different worlds. Commander Thorne stood at the front of the room, his expression unreadable. Today's final examination will test everything you've learned during your time at the Academy. You have 8 hours to complete a comprehensive assessment covering tactical analysis, strategic planning, leadership evaluation, and practical application of military doctrine. Jake took his seat at the testing station, noticing that every other cadet looked nervous. Some were reviewing their notes frantically. Others sat in meditation poses trying to center themselves before the challenge ahead. The alien cadets had spent months preparing for this moment, knowing that failure meant returning home in disgrace. The examination began with theoretical questions about galactic military history, then moved into complex scenario planning. Jake found himself analyzing battle formations used in the Centauri campaigns, designing supply chain solutions for multi-species operations, and developing diplomatic strategies for first-contact situations with hostile civilizations. As the hours passed, Jake noticed something odd. While other cadets were still working furiously on the theoretical sections, he had already moved through those and was now deep into the practical applications. The testing computer kept feeding him more complex scenarios, as if it was trying to find his limit. "His completion rate is unprecedented," whispered Sergeant Vex to Commander Thorne. "The adaptive testing system is running out of advanced scenarios to present to him." Jake worked through problems that would normally be reserved for seasoned officers with decades of experience. He designed evacuation procedures for colony worlds under attack, developed training protocols for integrating primitive species into galactic military forces, and created tactical responses to threats that the Academy had only theoretical knowledge about. By the 6th hour, something remarkable was happening. Jake wasn't just answering the questions correctly. He was providing solutions that improve upon the official Academy answers. His approaches were more efficient, more adaptable, and often addressed problems that the original scenarios hadn't even considered. "His rewriting our textbooks in real time," observed one of the senior instructors, reviewing Jake's responses on a secondary monitor. "Look at his solution to the Kepler defense scenario. His identified 3 critical flaws in our standard response protocol that we never noticed." The other cadet began finishing their examinations one by one, most of them looking exhausted and uncertain. Jake continued working, seemingly unaware of the growing crowd of observers gathering in the monitoring room above. His biometric readings showed no signs of stress or fatigue. If anything, he appeared to be getting more focused as the problems became more complex. When Jake finally submitted his completed examination, a hush fell over the entire facility. The automated grading system, designed to handle the most advanced military assessments in the galaxy, took nearly 30 minutes to process his responses. During that time, instructors and observers stood in complete silence, waiting for results that would either validate or shatter everything they thought they knew about military education. The results appeared on the main display screen, perfect scores across every category. 100% in theoretical knowledge, tactical application, strategic thinking, and leadership assessment. But more than that, the system had noted multiple instances where Jake's answers exceeded the expected parameters, providing solutions that were rated as superior to the established Academy standards. The graduation ceremony that evening was unlike any in the Academy's history. The usual celebration atmosphere was replaced by something more somber and profound. As Jake walked across the stage to receive his commission, the assembled alien officers watched in complete silence. Sergeant Corvain, who just a week earlier had dismissed Jake as another failed Deathworlder, now stood at the podium with an expression of deep respect mixed with something that looked almost like fear. "For 3 centuries, this Academy has operated on a simple principle," he began, his rough voice carrying easily through the silent auditorium. "We believe that warriors were made through training, discipline, and education. We took the finest specimens from across the galaxy and forged them into officers capable of defending civilization itself. He paused, his yellow eyes finding Jake in the crowd of graduates. This week, we learned something that changes everything we thought we knew about warfare and military leadership. We learned that some beings don't become warriors through our training. They simply reveal what they already are. The implications of those words rippled through the assembled crowd. Representatives from military organizations across the galaxy were already taking notes, preparing reports that would reshape military doctrine on dozens of worlds. Jake received a commission as a second lieutenant in the Galactic Defense Forces, authorized to command mixed-species units in combat operations. The ceremony concluded with a traditional oath of service, but even that felt different when spoken by someone who had just redefined what service meant. Within hours of the ceremony's end, Jake's personal communicator was flooded with messages, requests for interviews from military journals, offers of advanced positions from various defense organizations, and inquiries about establishing formal exchanges between Earth's military and alien forces. Every major military power in the galaxy wanted to understand what they were already calling Deathworld Doctrine. As Jake packed his belongings for his first assignment, Sergeant Vex approached him quietly. Her multiple eyes studied him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "What you've accomplished here will change galactic warfare forever," she said. "Do you understand what that means?" Jake paused in his packing, considering her words. "I hope it means fewer beings will die in conflicts that could be resolved more efficiently," he said simply. "But how did you do it?" she pressed. "How did you master in 1 week what takes our finest cadets months to learn?" Jake smiled politely, the same expression he'd worn when Sergeant Corvain had first welcomed him to hell 7 days earlier. "I was just doing what came naturally, Sergeant." As Jake walked toward the transport shuttle that would take him to his first command assignment, Sergeant Vex remained standing in the corridor, staring after him. That simple statement, "just doing what came naturally," would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. Because if Jake Thompson's natural abilities were representative of his species, then the galaxy was about to discover that humans weren't just another member race to be integrated into existing military structures. They were a force that would reshape the very nature of galactic warfare itself. And Jake, completely unaware of the profound implications of his week at the Academy, was already looking forward to his next challenge, whatever it might be. After all, challenges were just another word for opportunities to survive and grow stronger.